Welcome again, everybody, to our community webinar series. This is a series that we incepted right around the middle to the latter part of last year, primarily for the purpose of getting together as a community, members from the big team at all levels of our company, members from our client community, whether it be heads of talent or recruiters or hiring managers. Recognizing that we're a community and all getting together for the purpose of learning from one another, sharing with one another, and again, benefiting from each other's great practices. Also, we could help great companies hire the teams they need so that they could go and achieve their visions. We're particularly excited about this webinar on the topic of how to develop best-in-class recruiters. It's one that I can imagine it's on many people's minds, whether you're a recruiter yourself, wondering how best to develop as you progress in your career, or you're a recruiting leader, or you're a leader of an organization that is looking to place continued value in this regard. On this topic, we have our Director of Training and Project Operations with us, Nancy Wood, who's had a hand in the development of some of the very incredible recruiters that currently work at Bink or have made their way through our organization, some of which are with us today here as well. So I'll pass it over to Nancy to share a little more about herself and about what to expect. Just briefly on the logistics front, we could expect the content portion of this webinar to be about 30 minutes or so in length. After the content portion, we'll have a dedicated Q&A led by Kirsten from our team. If you have any questions either throughout or that you want addressed in the Q&A, you can either use the Q&A box right in the bottom of your webinar screen, or you could just pop it into chat. We'll capture it and make sure to address it. We also have a couple of interactive polls scattered in throughout, so enjoy those as well. And this is also being recorded, so everyone will get a copy of this upon completion. And with that, I'll pass it over to Nancy.
Cool. Thank you, Boris, for the very nice introduction. Like he mentioned, I am the Director of Training and Project Operations here at Bink, and I've had the privilege of helping more than 100 recruiters make their way into Bink, through Bink, sometimes beyond Bink, in the last seven and a half, almost 8 years. And it's been truly an incredible journey. I have a very strange background in event planning and then the law, and found my way to Bink. And so I think, like many recruiters and many people in the recruiting space, I got here in an interesting way, but have really, really enjoyed my time and have truly cherished the opportunities I've had here at Bink. So as we get started, I do want to say a quick thank you all for making time to come today, and for hopefully asking some good questions at the end. But to get started talking about how to develop best-in-class recruiters, I actually want to share a couple of really quick statistics to set the stage. So first, over the last several years, recruiters have experienced one of the fastest pay growths in the United States compared to other positions. On average, recruiters have seen a 7.6% year-over-year increase in compensation. And this is a pretty clear signal that recruiters are in high demand. That's something you probably have felt or experienced in some ways, but it's always nice to have our feelings sort of solidified with facts. The good news is that money isn't everything. And we've also seen research that shows that learning and development is one of the, or the number one benefit an employer can offer above both flexibility and financial incentives. So people, including recruiters, want to learn, grow, and develop in their role. Having a strong development program can help encourage your team to stay at your company, and that really just helps you in the long run as well. Turnover is expensive, and bringing new people on board is expensive. So investing in your learning and development program will help encourage that retention element and help encourage new people to come and to stay for a long time. There will, of course, always be exceptions, but across the board, we're seeing more and more emphasis put on opportunities for growth and development, new career, or staying in a job. So it's really important that we invest in learning and development for the future of our companies. Before we really get into the nitty-gritty elements of developing a best-in-class recruiter, I thought it would be a good idea to actually take a couple of minutes to define what a best-in-class recruiter is. We'll probably align on some things and hopefully the majority of things, but there might be a couple of surprises in here too. So to set that stage, let's talk about first the obvious pieces, the pieces that really like make a good recruiter. And those are things like recruiting fundamentals, right? Can the recruiter source candidates? Can they qualify candidates? Can they manage candidates? Can they close candidates? The real hard skills of the job, the real fundamentals of recruiting. These are all really good skills to have, but they're also kind of just the table stakes, right? They're not the whole of what makes a best-in-class recruiter. A lot of times these might just be like the good recruiters. What makes a great recruiter, that next level of recruiter, is someone who can balance those recruiting fundamentals with soft skills. The soft skills like time management and prioritization or conflict resolution. Questions like, will the recruiter be able to prioritize heads down time for sourcing, or figure out how to manage multiple hiring managers who all want a hire now? There's other pieces like, can they coach a hiring manager that isn't sure what they want through the recruiting process to a point where that hiring manager feels 100% confident that they hired the right person for their job? These two pieces together, the hard and the soft skills, make a pretty great recruiter, and a recruiter I think many of us would want in our organization. But if we're aiming for a best-in-class recruiter, the question is, what else is there? And here at Bink, we think that best-in-class recruiters rise above the good and great recruiters by having the right mindset. So they understand the greater impact their work has on a business and are connected and committed to that purpose. That connection to a common purpose is super important. They, should be as invested in the growth and development of the company as the CEO or any other business leader, because they understand that every hire they make is going to help grow that company. On top of that, they'll also have skills to overcome adversity, to stay positive when the markets get tough, and the confidence to take ownership when things don't always go right? So the confidence to take ownership in their wins and their mistakes. These types of best-in-class recruiters rarely just walk in off of the street to your organization, but they absolutely can be developed, and that's really the focus of today. So now that we've got this working definition, let's start to talk about what it takes to develop them. So like any development program, our basic goal is to help someone get from point A to point B, right? A very simple concept. In this example, point B is also pretty obvious, and coincidentally is the best-in-class recruiter we just defined. So the interesting piece, though, is that the point A of someone's development journey is often very different. It's a moving target. There is no specific pedigree for a recruiter. There are no college degrees in recruiting. There are only a few certifications. And we really do see that recruiters come from all over the place. And so what they bring to the table will be different. At Bing, for example, we've seen successful recruiters from obvious places like sales backgrounds, but also from less obvious places like lawyers or teachers, professions that have a lot of transferable soft skills or mindset pieces. The first tip for today in developing best-in-class recruiters is to remember that everyone starts from their own point A. It's important to remember that they're going to bring different backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives. And our goal is to develop a program that recognizes what people bring to the table and help them fill in their gaps. One quick note on this image, though, is that it doesn't really do justice to the concept. It looks here like a very simple timeline, but people will actually be in any number of places on this line at any given time. And point B isn't really a static place. It's not a destination. Recruiting, like all industries, is always evolving. There are always new tools coming on the market. People are creating new hacks. And there are just new industry benchmarks all of the time. Best-in-class recruiters will have the mindset that their development journey will never end, that it's not a destination, that it's a journey, that it's an ongoing and continuous process. They'll recognize they always have something more to learn, and they'll strive for that. knowing that we're working from a moving target at point A and also a little bit of a moving target at point B, it's easy to assume that your development programs are going to require a bit of flexibility, right? So how much flexibility and when should we emphasize different areas? And I thought I'd put together a little visual that will help sort of demonstrate this. So let's check that out here. We're going to use a simple triangle. The colors will make sense in a second, but let's talk about those 3 areas we just described, right? So one corner will represent recruiting fundamentals, another will represent soft skills, and a third will represent that mindset factor. Our target really is to balance all 3 of these pieces in our development of best-in-class recruiters. And that is represented by a very tiny triangle right there in the middle of that little pink space. And so our goal is to bring people to that middle where they're really benefiting and strong in all 3 areas. This leads to tip number 2 for developing best-in-class recruiters, which is you'll need to find the right balance between these topic areas. And the right balance will be a little bit tricky because it comes from recognizing where someone's point A is. Finding the right balance will be dependent on where your team is and where your individuals are. So to help demonstrate this a little bit, I want to use a quick example. For this example, we're going to use a hypothetical recruiter who's new to your organization and has 2 years of sales experience, but is brand new to recruiting. They have skills, they have strengths in, and we learn this through the interview process, in staying organized, and they also have some weaknesses in those recruiting fundamentals like candidate management. When you think of this type of profile, and we think about our triangle here, let's do a quick poll. Check out the numbers here. Thinking about these traits, what number represents the area of the triangle you'd expect this type of recruiter to fall into? So we've learned that they're organized, they're proactive, they're very loyal to their organizations. They've never sourced, so they struggle a little bit with managing the candidate experience and sourcing. So taking those factors into account, what number on this triangle, where would you place this person? The poll has been up for a little while. We're going to give you a little bit more time to answer. But once we've got a good handful, we'll share the results. Great, yes. So it looks like the majority of folks had the person placed in section 3, this purple area, and that is actually where I would also place them. They likely bring a lot of those soft skills up in the red corner, and they likely have a good mindset. I think loyalty is often a good indicator, a strong indicator of having the right mindset. And so I put them pretty equally between the red and the blue area. But that actually also means that they're kind of far away from those recruiting fundamentals. So when we think about where we want to focus our program and where we want to highlight things, we'll actually focus on pulling them towards the yellow area, pulling them over to the other side of this triangle. While your goal is to pull them closer to this yellow area, you actually want to make sure that you don't exclude topics in the other corners. And that's really the third tip of the day, which is you need to stay flexible to address, everyone's point A, but you also want to make sure you cover everything. This can be a challenging juxtaposition, but is really important. And it's always tempting to try to save time and only focus on the deficiencies, but it's important to not assume that everyone has the same baseline knowledge. And that's primarily because recruiting really is different in every single organization. Every company is going to do things a little bit differently. We all have our basics, but there is a little bit of a variation on the theme of recruiting, right? So you do want to make sure that you're covering everything, but emphasizing the areas where they have deficiencies. Let's do one more quick example using this triangle to make sure we understand a little bit how to use it. So in this example, let's assume you're working with a recruiter who has actually been with your organization for 3 or more years. They're really great at finding candidates, and they're an exceptional storyteller. They know how to sell your company. But sometimes they have struggled with getting things done on time, and there are some hiring managers that maybe don't enjoy working with them as much as other hiring managers. So in this same way, using the same triangle, which area, which number would you think represents this type of recruiter? Which number would they fall into? So we'll do another poll here. That should have just popped up. You've got a couple of options in number 2, 3, 4, or 5. So again, we'll give you a couple seconds to think through this. And once we have a majority of responses, we'll be able to share those with you. Great. It looks like the poll results are in, and we have quite a few in 5, the majority in section 5 here, and a handful in 4 and 2 as well. This one I do think is a little bit trickier than the previous example because measuring mindset can be tough, especially without a little bit more context. I personally would put them here in the green section, maybe even bordering on that yellow section. I don't think there's any doubt that they have those recruiting fundamentals down, and the longevity at your company hopefully indicates that they're connected to the business and bought in and really, really engaged, so that they have the right mindset. However, it sounds like they do struggle with some of the soft skills like time management and prioritization, and maybe even having difficult conversations or managing relationships with their hiring managers. So it sounds like there are some soft skills in need of development here. For this type of recruiter, we'd look to emphasize those soft skills while reinforcing the recruiting fundamentals and the mindset areas, maybe even trying to pull them a little bit closer to the mindset as well, making sure that they're really fully invested. At this point, you're probably thinking this is all really, really great, but what do I actually teach them? What do I actually do? And I promise we're almost there, but before we get there, I want to cover one final tip, which is to make sure that you vary your approach. So we often unintentionally default to one style of teaching or learning, but blended learning is the new norm. So having different types of learning styles is like the baseline at this point. So knowing your options and when they're most useful can be really valuable. The first and most obvious technique you might use is classroom sessions. So classroom sessions are great for covering basic information. The more interactive you make them, the better. And at Bink, we often use these to cover our best practices and recruiting fundamentals and explaining new concepts. Shadowing is another vital piece or vital technique in your recruiter development. So, sometimes we'll say things like the act of recruiting is learning recruiting. It's something that's kind of difficult to read or learn from reading, but actually doing it is where you learn how to be really great. So with new employees, you might not want to just throw them right on the phone. You might not want to throw them directly into that fire, but if they can watch others, learn from one another, and then apply it, you'll get the best of both worlds. One quick secret tip from Bink here is that the best recruiters, though, are also the most authentic recruiters. So they're the ones who aren't trying to read from a script or play a part or be a recruiter. And shadowing can run some risks. Shadowing can run the risk that someone may try to adopt the style of another recruiter. They may try to be like this other person that they've seen be successful. That's great, but it often prevents them from being truly authentic. So if you have the opportunity for your new recruiters to shadow multiple styles and really help them find and hone their own voice, that's going to be better for you and for them. So whenever you have opportunities to show them different ways and success in different ways is really important in this shadowing piece. The next technique is role playing. So role playing is a pretty obvious extension from shadowing. And we really use this as a way for people to practice and get the nerves out. Everybody needs sort of a safe space to make a mistake every once in a while. You never really want to make a mistake when it counts. And so role plays are a great way to give your team opportunities to try something new, to take some risks, but to take them in a safe place where, you know, they're not going to cost you or the org too much strife. So it's also a great place for feedback. So having a role play gives your people an opportunity to receive real-time feedback from folks, again, in sort of a safer environment. Another technique for teaching and developing great recruiters is debriefing. So this is a huge element of learning. People won't learn everything in their first week. They're not going to learn everything during their onboarding and orientation. So embracing learning and development as a long-term strategy that extends day to day and into their work is a really important piece of the puzzle. You can use debriefs really in a lot of different ways. You know, common ones we've seen are, you know, after every offer goes out, whether they're won or lost, you debrief on that candidate and that process and what went well and what didn't go well and what you might change for the future. This can also happen as each job is filled or on like a quarterly rhythm or something like that. So you can use them whenever you like. The most important thing here, though, with debriefs, though, is to make sure that you're documenting the responses, what's coming up there. And this is partially so you don't forget, but it's also because those debriefs become really, really great material for future case studies and role playing. So what you learn in these debriefs can then feed the cycle of your classroom trainings, your role plays, your shadows, that sort of thing. Another great piece, another great technique is through mentorship and coaching. So it's no secret that recruiting has its ups and downs, and having a third party available to help a recruiter like navigate those tough times can be really important. And so we found that mentorship and coaching can be vital to really developing that mindset piece of the triangle and helping people sort of manage where their head is at any given point in the recruiting process. Let's now finally get into what all of this might look like together. And I'm going to use a couple of examples from here at Bank. So the first thing to demonstrate is that similar to closing, learning is a process, not an event. It's something we do once. It's not something we do once and move on. It's something that sort of permeates our day-to-day and should be a continuous process. And it's often a process that builds upon itself. So here at Bank, we consider this process sort of a four-step, a four-phase approach. The first one being our new hire orientation program. This new hire orientation program is pretty classroom and practice-based and relatively formal. It's delivered over a short, specific period of time and is really encapsulated and meant to cover the baseline of really anything or everything somebody might run into. From there, we consider the next phase of development just sort of a generic ongoing training piece, but that ongoing training piece includes a number of different programs. So programs like an open learning stipend, a more formal mentorship program, and monthly live advanced trainings for our team, as well as the invaluable on-the-job training. This is where people are really in their environments, really with clients, and they're debriefing as they go with their managers and other team members. The third phase of development that we consider here at Bank is sort of manager and leadership orientation. This takes a similar format to our new hire orientation, where it's delivered over a short period of time and is meant to cover the basics and fundamentals in those three areas of mindset, recruiting fundamentals, and soft skills. And from there, we move into the more ongoing manager and leadership development. So in here, we'll do some ongoing classroom trainings. We'll do a lot more mentorship. And there's a lot of peer coaching and debriefing here as well, and learning as we go and learning as we do. So as you consider the development of your recruiters, don't be afraid to let the natural recruiting life cycle guide the development of your people. Setting a solid foundation and building upon it is great. So that could mean with a brand new recruiter, you focus on sourcing and you help them build that muscle. And then you introduce candidate management. And then you introduce, closing call shadows. And you build those muscles step by step by step, and then build in ownership and leadership responsibilities. We often say that recruiting is a team sport, and best-in-class recruiters will be able to teach and uplift others on their team. So being able to communicate an idea is a really clear sign of learning and really having an understanding of something. So as you develop your team into those more senior positions, giving them opportunities to share and teach and guide and lead others is another way to help them develop in their own skills. Let's jump into a couple of more real examples of what we do here at Bank. And the first one I'm going to talk about is actually our new hire orientation program. So that first phase in our development. The content of our sessions are going to look pretty familiar. They are divided into these three areas: recruiting fundamentals, soft skills, and mindset. We cover things like, how to run intake meetings, how to source candidates, how to write a value prop. But we also cover the soft skills, the squishy topics around what it means to be a consultant. How do we manage our candidates? What is professionalism? How do we communicate with others? And on top of that, we do spend quite a bit of time building connection to Bank, our mission, our history, our strategic plan, and more importantly, the career path and the roles and responsibilities and expectations of our team. So all of these together, and there's a little note at the bottom that I should call out. This is not an exhaustive list of everything we cover in our new hire orientation program, but is a good start. So with that, we also use a number of techniques. So these are techniques that we talked about before, things like the classroom sessions and shadowing and role playing. So we'll use not only these live classroom sessions, but also virtual work at your own pace sessions via a tool called Lessonly. We'll then set up shadows and role plays with current team members. And a good chunk of our material has been inspired by real life examples and past projects and information collected from our debriefs. Finally, we actually have a buddy program where we assign an existing banker, a current banker, to our new hires to help them navigate their first 6 weeks at the company. It's not truly formal mentorship or coaching, but it is a safe place for people to ask, what they might think is a silly question or something like that. So that buddy program kind of fills in that last piece as well. Hopefully these last two slides have been able to illustrate how we use tips number 3 and 4, covering everything, but also varying our approach. But you might still wonder, how does this apply to tip number 1, which was to recognize that everyone starts at point A? The truth of the matter is we do ask all of our recruiters, regardless of level, to go through the same program. And we spend a lot of time on that first day, helping them recognize where their point A is and help them understand how they can use that to approach the content. So for brand new recruiters, we recognize that they'll be taking everything in for the first time. This is the first time they're going to hear a lot of words. And so they're really, probably going to be digesting a lot. And we encourage them to ask questions, take good notes, reflect on what they learned, and then practice more than once, right? So we may schedule more role plays or shadows with them than we would with a more senior recruiter. For recruiters that have been around the block a little bit, the ones who have been recruiting for a while, we encourage them to use the time to review their current practices and habits. Is there anything they don't like about how they've previously done things? Now is the time to change that. We encourage them to listen to how we do things differently, but we also encourage them to sort of question the status quo. We ask that they share their experiences with us and the other new hires, because them having to explain their experiences and their perspective also helps solidify their own understanding of the situation. Another really great program that we run here at Bank that helps highlight how we use different techniques and while covering those 3 different learning areas is our ART program. So ART falls in that second phase of development, that ongoing training piece, and it stands for Advanced Recruiter Trainings. We deliver these live each month, and topics can vary pretty wildly. we recently hosted a candidate closing panel discussion, which falls in the recruiting fundamentals category, and used the classroom and sort of debrief techniques that we talked about. So this session really served two audiences, the first being the panelists and the second being the actual audience, the actual attendees of the session. The panelists were challenged to solidify their thoughts and experience to share that with others in a clean way that others could understand. And the attendees were able to watch a sort of live debrief and learn from others' real life experiences and what went well and what didn't go well. We also recently hosted a session on making and changing habits. And so this one definitely falls more in the soft skills area and might seem a little bit out of the box, but so much of the recruiter's job, so much of their work is based in having good habits. It's as simple as, do they have a habit of always asking logistics questions on calls? What are your comp expectations? What is your timeline? What are your other interviews? That becoming a real rote habit that people are just in to make sure that they're managing their candidates along the way. It's also, this is again, this session, the making and changing habits, did fall in a classroom format, but we also included an activity where bankers were able to take an assessment to learn their tendencies. And that was a great way to then leave that live session and have information that could help coach or share feedback with others. So understanding a little bit more about yourself gives you common language to work with others to help them give you feedback and also develop from there. Another piece we did was on non-technical sourcing strategies. So as a recruiting firm, our roots really are in technical recruiting. And by roots, I mean like over a decade ago. So it's been a while, but our roots are in technical recruiting, and we recently hosted a session specifically focused on sourcing techniques for non-technical candidates. Where do they hang out? Where do we find them? How do we, identify the good from the bad, all of that. So it stretched the world for some of our recruiters who were more solely based in tech, and it created real practical tips and tricks for them to take back to their work and actually practice and do, and then discuss amongst each other. Lastly, we also recently hosted a session on late-stage candidate management. While recruiter screens are often pretty straightforward and you can follow a pretty standard script, the later in the recruiting funnel a candidate gets, the more somewhat random your conversations can become. And so there's a lot of variables, and you often have to start helping candidates manage their own emotions. So this was a session that really mixed the recruiting fundamentals with the soft skills of learning how to empathize with others and coach others and help them sort of manage a decision-making process, which is a huge part of a recruiter's job. These are all just examples of what we've done here at Bank, and there are plenty more where that came from, but hopefully they give you an idea of the types of things you can cover with your team and how you can employ them in different ways and different techniques on their own or in combination. So as a quick recap before we get into the questions, I do want to share sort of all 4 tips we shared throughout the session sort of together in one piece. So first, remember that everyone is going to start from their own point A. And second, that a strong program will find a balance between recruiting fundamentals, soft skills, and developing the right mindset. Third, your program needs to stay flexible to address the moving target of that point A, but it does need to cover everything to make sure that you're thorough and not assuming that folks all have the same understanding of something. And then lastly, you should be prepared to vary your approach. You should be prepared to use the different techniques that best fit the topics you're trying to work with on your team. So hopefully this information has been helpful to get you thinking in a new direction, and that through a few examples, you've sparked some ideas. But at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions that have come up. Kirsten is going to lead us through some of those. So with that, I will ask her to share some of the questions that have come up.
Great, thanks, Nancy. While we wait for the questions to roll in, I'm going to launch a quick survey.
Okay.
And everyone should see that now. While that's getting filled out, a couple did pop into the chat box. The first one is, what is the learning stipend? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And we actually designed the learning stipend to be really quite open. So there's a couple of theories, right? So one might be people have to be open to learning to be into learning. And so sometimes opening their mind to things that they're interested in can open them up to other things that are also interesting. So the learning stipend is a quarterly stipend we provide for all employees. We ask them to use it in really any way that will help them be better in their job. We've seen some people use it for things like an Excel course, folks who are more interested in the data analytics of, how is their recruiting funnel processing or how is that process going? And how can they use tools like Excel or Google Sheets to help that be better? We've seen some people attend improv classes, which is a great way to kind of get over some of your public speaking skills or fears, and is a great way to learn kind of how to flow a conversation with candidates. We've also seen people do yoga teaching certifications. Those are, great ways to balance their physical well-being, their mental well-being with their work well-being. And I think one of the interesting things too about our learning stipend program is we recognize that learning comes from everywhere, and that it doesn't have to be specific to recruiting to be relevant to recruiting. And so we do encourage people to think critically about what would help them do their job well. And that's why we've seen some really, really creative uses. Some more common uses, I've seen folks use it to have a Kindle Unlimited subscription where they're able to monthly get, different business books or even fiction books that are of interest to them. So really the goal with our learning stipend program is to open people up to learning in ways that work for them, and that will open them up to the other formal programs we run within the organization as well.
Great. And the next question is, if I only have one recruiter, who is supposed to mentor them?
Yes, that is a very good question. And the answer is anyone. No, I'm kidding. But that is the real reality. Bink is special and unique in the sense that we do have, I probably shouldn't quote a specific number, but probably somewhere more than 80 recruiters right now. And so there's a lot of opportunity for mentorship. And I would say that if you're in a situation where you only have 1, 2, 3, or you have a relatively small team, or you have a team where they're all really at the same level, encourage them to build a network, encourage them to build a relationship with recruiters outside of the org. The recruiting community really is so small that they can learn those recruiting fundamentals and mindsets from other pieces, from other people, from other recruiters out in the space. I know there are a handful of Slack communities, open Slack communities, or LinkedIn groups or Facebook groups of recruiters out in the world that can be really great knowledge shares and places where people can go for questions, where they can learn from others outside of their org and all of that. That mindset piece, though, we talk about really does a lot of times focus on connection to the company. And so they can often find strong mentors within the org that are outside of the recruiting function. And so maybe it's something like a similar org. Maybe it's someone in HR, maybe it's someone in sales, maybe it's someone nearby that can help them understand what is the organization doing, moving towards, and really help connect them to those sorts of mission pieces. So I think a piece of that too is that your mentor doesn't have to be a single person. It can be multiple people for different purposes. So I really do encourage recruiters to expand their networks and to work with others and to learn from them as well.
Great. The next question is, where can we find the other webinars you mentioned, such as the later stage candidate conversations?
Yeah, so those ART programs, those advanced recruiter trainings that I provided are ones we've only traditionally provided internally to the company. And so I don't actually have recordings for those in like the greater internet out in the world. But it is interesting. And if you're very interested in that topic, maybe we can do our next webinar on that or something similar. So right now, those are still internal assets, but knowing there's people asking about it will help us set our next webinar topic.
And that's all the questions that we have at this time.
Okay, great. Well, this has been really, really good, really fun, really interesting for me. I hope that you all were able to take a little bit of something away. Thank you again for taking the time. Feel free to reach out to me or anyone else if you have questions on any of these topics. And then Kirsten will be sending out a recording of this as well as probably the slides.